When you think about what a president might snack on during the day, you might conclude that they prefer fancy foods like caviar. But you would be surprised to know they often go back to their roots. Let's see what that means in terms of snacking for our presidents. George Washington was known for a lot of things during his presidential run: his impact on history, his policies and changes to the laws, and his memorable campaigns. A little-known fact about the esteemed man was that he had a particular fondness for cherries and was known to snack on them frequently. Like a smoker needs a puff every 5 minutes, Washington could not go around the White House without finding an excuse to pop a cherry. John Adams, on the other hand, deeply appreciated hard cider, and it was one of the things you would most commonly see him with if you were in the vicinity. A lot of the White House staff also recalls how much of the stuff they would have to fetch because of the obsession their president had developed with it over the course of his terms. Thomas Jefferson kept it pretty plain and simple with some mac and cheese, going back to his childhood days. We are not sure how true this is, but apparently his mom used to make a pretty good mac and cheese, and the love of the dish stuck with him forevermore. Even without a nostalgic backstory, who hasn't enjoyed a mac and cheese phase at some point? James Madison's love for ice cream began when his wife, Dolly, became famously fond of 3 particular flavors: apricot, pink peppermint, and vanilla. As far as first ladies go, it was pretty sweet of her to keep her husband's glucose levels covered by giving him a newfound sweet tooth, no pun intended. James Monroe, on the other hand, dearly loved Virginia ham as a breakfast option. He would swear by some ham with toasted bread, or just a plain and simple ham sandwich. You would be surprised what a small protein-based kick can do to your day and how it can get you going. Honestly, as far as breakfast options go, there are a lot more frugal and worse-tasting ones than Virginia ham, which is still a classic to this day. John Quincy Adams likely had one of the healthiest lifestyles of any president. This man really knew his fruits, and he was deeply serious about them too. From mangoes to plums and grapes, he ate everything, and an assortment of fresh fruit would always be available in the White House during his presidency. Andrew Jackson was pretty fond of what was known as leather britches, which is really just an extra American way to refer to green beans with bacon. Peas, beans, and basic vegetables have always gone beautifully with any kind of protein. It is kind of one of those golden rules of the culinary world where everyone just universally agrees on something. In this case, green beans and bacon have a presidential stamp of approval behind them. Martin Van Buren loved fresh oysters, and in his free time would go on fishing trips to get some catches of his own. Of course, he rarely had the time for trips like that, so the staff ensured he would get the freshest oysters America could serve up. Oyster-based dishes and seafood in general were something he delighted in very frequently. William Henry Harrison brought an old Georgia classic back to life during his run as a president when he popularized squirrel stew again. During the mid-1900s, things like this started to take a dive in popularity, but Harrison was so fond of the stew, also commonly known as Brunswick stew, that he got a trend going. John Tyler was our second president after James Madison with an avid sweet tooth, but his cravings extended to Indian pudding more than anything else. You could always find him finishing up a bowl after a meeting or a rally or whatever it is presidents do to pass the time from day to day. Everyone has to unwind at the end of it, and Mr. Tyler chose Indian pudding as his relaxant. James Polk had a deep appreciation for his cornbread, and for a time, it was thought by most of the members of the White House that the two were as inseparable as winter and beanies. Cornbread itself was a pretty light snack, and its best trait was that it was really filling for its size, so maybe he had time efficiency in mind. Or maybe he just really loved his cornbread. Zachary Taylor loved Creole cuisine from Louisiana or New Orleans, especially these irresistible little deep-fried rice fritters which had a pretty sweet aftertaste to them. His first lady and wife, Margaret McCall Smith Taylor, would often enjoy treats like this from the cuisine during their tea time, which is a pretty soft palate for an esteemed war general of the Mexican-American War of 1812. Millard Fillmore apparently had a fondness for rejuvenating broths, which is why he always kept a bowl of hot soup nearby. Reportedly, he was seen drinking all kinds of soup, from tomato-based ones to clear soups. It is nice to see a president show some love for this otherwise neglected dish. Franklin Pierce adored fried clams above all else, and they sustained him through much of his presidency. In fact, you could not see the guy at lunchtimes without a plate of fried clams on his table, and he was always the first to reach out for them too. James Buchanan, on the other hand, thought cabbage over everything was pretty rad. Fried cabbage as a topping or as the centerpiece of the dish, he would always be eating many cabbage-based meals or just chowing down on it plain and simple. That's definitely dedication to the bit, and while we can see the appeal, loving it to the point that you eat it as is with nothing else is a bit beyond our imagination. Abraham Lincoln kept it simple and American with some bacon strips every morning or as a casual snack to keep him energized and ready to tackle the problems of a world-leading democracy. He was a very hearty eater, and besides gingerbread cookies, you could not separate the man from his bacon. Andrew Johnson was often seen snacking on some sweet potatoes. We get it, honestly. Full of fiber, quick, easy to eat, and with a delightful aftertaste. There are a lot of nutritional pros and cons, lots of logical reasons as to why sweet potatoes should be a part of your diet, but something tells us that it was just the nostalgic taste that kept him coming back for more. Ulysses S. Grant was a big fan of traditional foods, and his all-time favorite snack was rice pudding, something that was never a sight you would miss at the tables of the White House as long as he was in charge. In fact, most of his lunches, parties, and dinners would always have a section for rice pudding. Now here is a president with some flashy taste. Rutherford B. Hayes and his angel cakes were a sight to see in the White House, mostly because it added some style and razzle-dazzle to the otherwise pretty fixed menu of the White House. The cake itself is not really a snack, but it could work as one since it is so light that people literally called it angel cake. The cake itself is served with fresh berries, and it barely feels like anything when you start digging in. James Garfield loved squirrel soup above all else, and this was a dish that was more or less forgotten both by the upper-class politicians and the working middle-class people. Squirrel soup was pretty popular in the South and during the Depression, but to see a president eating it certainly gives some much-needed rep to the dish. Chester Arthur liked to get into the nitty and gritty with some Southern-style mutton chops, particularly if they were fried or grilled. You know when you grill something and you hit that nice, perfectly toasty charred state? That's how he preferred his chops, and we definitely can see where the man was coming from. Or maybe we are all wrong and he just liked to match his meals with his facial hair, which was also mutton chops. Grover Cleveland reportedly told a high school friend that he often wished he could forgo the fancy fine dining served at the White House, which was primarily French cuisine for the most part, but all poor Cleveland ever wanted was some pickled herring and Swiss cheese. No matter how much you move up socioeconomically, some things stay the same. Benjamin Harrison stayed honest with his roots as a citizen of Ohio and Indiana, which also happened to be the top regions for corn production at the time. This shaped his taste in snacks for the rest of his life, and he would swear by corn on the cob well into his 50s and beyond. William McKinley also liked to go for a very conventional routine with his daily snacks and meals, which were mostly just meat and fish. We are sure that all of you had experiences where you went out to fancy restaurants but came back home craving the simple comfort food. To McKinley, a good plate of fresh fish and nicely seared meat was exactly that. Theodore Roosevelt also had that same kind of mentality. One look at his eating habits will let you know all about how he would turn away everything the White House had to offer for some steak and gravy. Often, he would also have some mashed potatoes on the side if he wanted to make a full meal out of it. William Taft preferred potatoes without gravy and always requested his steak well done. Some well-seasoned potatoes and premium beef were arguably his biggest supporters throughout his presidency. Also, it helped his PR with the Republican side too. He really pushed some traditional American stereotypes with his image. Woodrow Wilson refined his diet more than his predecessors, favoring lighter options like chicken salad. His staff would always have a few bowls ready to go, and they were regularly running from his office back to the kitchen with them. Everyone has their cravings, and while fried chicken does it for most, Wilson preferred to eat lighter. Warren G. Harding was from the Midwest, where the delicacy of choice most days was a home-cooked chicken pot pie. Now, nothing really beats the cooking right from home, but the White House came pretty close. Every day, Harding would be served only the finest of chicken pot pies. Calvin Coolidge was a fond lover of apple pie, which is debatably the pie that started it all in America, and a sweetheart, literally, of the entire nation. It is no surprise that even the president would constantly indulge in this whenever he could. An apple pie makes even your most stressful worries go away for a while. Herbert Hoover, on the other hand, had a fondness for sweet potatoes topped with marshmallows. Just like apple pie, steak and gravy, or meat and fish, this can be found at Thanksgiving tables all over the country. The situation at the Hoover household and the Oval Office was pretty much the same, and it was more like a daily thing than once in a year. According to his White House keeper, Henrietta Nesbitt, Franklin Roosevelt loved all things grilled cheese, especially grilled cheese sandwiches, which he would often have alongside things like hot dogs, fish chowder, scrambled eggs, and more traditional American food. Despite what his doctors may say about cholesterol, it seems that never steered him away from a hot plate of grilled cheese. Harry Truman was what you call a picky eater. You know, one of those people who need their meal exactly the way they want it, otherwise they cannot eat it. To be fair, his demands were simple enough. All he asked was that you make the steak well done, but it could not be a second beneath or over the limit. It had to be perfectly well done. Dwight Eisenhower was on the opposite end of the spectrum. He was more like those people that eat for sustenance, not fun, but there was one dish he enjoyed fully. That was the First Lady's $1 million fudge, and she would often add marshmallows and nuts to it. Guess he had a big soft spot for chocolate after all. It is a bit heartwarming to know that even the presidents can have something in common with little kids and everyday adults alike. John F. Kennedy always said no to the classic tomato clam chowder you find on the streets of Manhattan, as his cup of tea was creamy clam chowder. He never really had a fondness for thinner textures in chowder, preferring vibrant and thick cream that was not too strong in taste. Lyndon B. Johnson ate like a gladiator and a proper American, seeing as how his snack of choice was always chicken-fried steak, mashed potatoes, and some gravy. Though the portions would change depending upon his schedule, he was always known to eat pretty big plates. Unlike most of the others, Richard Nixon had a slightly weirder palate. Not that we are judging, since cottage cheese and ketchup sounds like a combo worth trying anyway. It just is not something you particularly hear about too often, or maybe you guys have different experiences. Was it something popular around where you grew up? Either way, the president seemed to adore it. Gerald Ford kept it super simple and plain with a pot roast every other day to keep himself going. The things a pot roast can do to a person's health for the week are incredible. You feel a solid 20 years younger if it has that home-cooked comfort food vibe to it going to. That was the kind of roast Ford loved. Jimmy Carter was a big fan of grits, which was a Southern dish that he favored above all else. You know, naming your dog after a childhood favorite character or someone you know that is not here anymore makes sense. Carter took it a step further and named his dog Grits too, which is some real commitment to a pretty simple but tasty recipe. Most of these don't even sound like snacks, but Ronald Reagan certainly fit the definition with his habit of always munching on jelly beans. In particular, he loved the colorful ones that were crunchy rather than chewy. You know, at one point, he even ordered 300,000 to be spread out around the White House, Capitol, and other buildings in the federal area. When George W. Bush was not busy consuming extreme amounts of pork rinds, he would idle his days away with popcorn. Not something that he would only have in a theater-type setting, he always kept several packets of popcorn ready. To be fair, we get it. They can be pretty addictive. Bill Clinton was a massive fan of cheeseburgers. A basic quarter-pounder with double layers of cheese was next to godliness in his. You could always find a bag with jalapeno cheeseburgers in it next to his desk at the office. We guessed that the theory that behind every vegan is a former meat addict might be true after all. And we wonder if he misses his cheeseburger days now that he has gone to the other side. A White House chef, Christetta Comerford, once told the press that George Bush had a pretty wacky idea of a snack. He loved these homemade cheeseburger pizzas, but they were not exactly the one you might be thinking of. It was more so the cheeseburger toppings placed on a margarita pizza, which we cannot lie sounds pretty appetizing. Barack Obama once told Jerry Seinfeld that he had a pretty big lack of self-control as far as nachos were concerned. According to what the man said, he would have to get the bowl taken away from him, otherwise he would approach pretty dangerous levels of guacamole buildup. Donald Trump's snack of choice was, on the other hand, giving back to the economy rather than relying on the private chefs of the White House. He would have fast food served in it or get it delivered to his own private jet. Burger King and McDonald's were his biggest vices, which he claimed offer a standard of cleanliness that is hard to find elsewhere. Wonder what magical branches of the two he has been visiting. Joe Biden has always been spotted on his way to getting an old-fashioned ice cream cone, and the most recent one was in Washington, D.C. earlier around June in 2023. His favorites would be chocolate cones, and he also endorses local ice cream businesses like Jenny's Ice Cream. He's been pretty open about his habit of it, and we gotta respect someone of his age still keeping up with the latest trends in the ice cream world. Well, now you know what all our presidents love to snack on. Like, subscribe and let's keep these snacky memories alive.